Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's a very special day for me. I've just seen the book maybe 20 minutes ago, and I'm still sort of coming to grips with the fact that after all these months spent writing it, changing it, editing it, proofreading it, that it's finally here. So if I become overexcited at various stages in this presentation, please do bear with me. The book is called Only Beautiful, Please. The phrase was taken from a remark by an officer of the Korean People's Army who had confiscated the camera of a friend of mine who was visiting me in Pyongyang and who was taking photographs which the officer believed showed the DPRK in a bad light. He checked the disc on the camera, established that in fact this was not the case, that there was nothing there that he wanted to take exception to, and he handed it back with a broad smile and the words, "Only beautiful, please." So only take pictures of the beautiful aspects of our country. And the phrase sort of stuck in our minds and became the title of the book. It does work, good. It has 4 sections. I went to Stanford in September 2010 with the aim of simply writing about what I had done, seen, thought, and experienced in North Korea, knowing that very few foreigners actually have the opportunity to live in that country, and feeling that an insertion of ground truth into current debates on North Korea might be of some interest to people. And APARC, the Schornstein APARC of Stanford University, was kind enough to give me shelter, lots of California sunshine, and so I decided to sit and read and write for the months it took me to write the book. While I was there, people kept asking me what it was like to be a foreigner in North Korea. So I felt, well, if this was of interest also, then I'd write about that too. So section 2 of the book, Foreigners in the DPRK, was born. And with great pride, I produced these 2 sections and told the academics at Stanford that I'd done so. Fine, they said, but this is a university, and we would like something a bit more cerebral than just your account of your experiences and an account of what it was like to be a foreigner. How about some analysis? Now, as colleagues in the UN will confirm, I don't really do cerebral that well. And so I sort of sucked my pencil for a little while and thought about what I could write, and decided that I would try to write up why I thought the DPRK is the way it is. After all, it's a unique country. There's nowhere on earth quite like it. And I hope that in section 3, in part 3 of the book, that I've produced an analysis showing how it was deformed from birth, that in many ways it was a result of failed decolonization by the Soviet Union. And with great pride, I produced this. The academics at Stanford then said, fine, but as you were an ambassador in the DPRK, surely you've got something to say about how we should handle the country. I think I responded something on the lines that if I could answer questions like that, I wouldn't be working for a government salary all these years. But I thought, okay, they're going to publish this book, and I probably owe them some kind of section dealing with these kind of issues. So I wrote part 4 of the book, where I don't have any great new departures or initiatives to offer. But what I do hope I've achieved is to demonstrate that current approaches, in the plural, to the DPRK have not worked, and have not worked for a very long time. And that what we have ended up with is armed camps. Some people saying that there should be greater engagement with the DPRK, others saying that this doesn't work, that you have to contain it, you have to apply pressure to force it to change. And that, in fact, neither of these approaches have worked, and that we would do a lot better, rather than having armed camps sniping at each other all the time, to recognize that these approaches have failed and to think about what we actually do from now on, and also to recognize that leaving the DPRK as it is, just ignoring it, is very dangerous. The situation is unstable, it could go critical at short notice, and if it ever did that, the world would be faced with an absolutely horrible problem. So that, in brief, is the structure of the book, which, as Stephen has pointed out, is for sale outside. Do buy multiple copies. I wanted to share with you some photographs of the DPRK, and around these weave some of the narrative in parts 1 and part 2 of the book, which accounts for most of it. These are actually the full colour versions of the black and white photographs that you'll see in the book, so you'll probably recognize it when you read them. The first one was taken near Tanchon, and I put this in the book to illustrate the dire poverty of the DPRK. These houses, as you can see, are really very ramshackle. What you can't see on this photograph was the bitter chill of that day. It was really cold. And in the DPRK, the only way you can heat houses is by burning yontan, by burning little briquettes of coal dust. You will see there is no smoke coming out of those houses. Whoever was sitting there that day when I took that photograph must have been huddled up for warmth and probably feeling very cold indeed. Notice also, see if I can get the, aha, I've got the laser pen to work, good. The outdoor lavatories, you call them restrooms in this country, don't you? Okay, outdoor restrooms. And the fact that, despite the fact that there's no heating, that there is at least some electricity. So they're just a few steps off the bottom. On outside lavatories, sorry, let me go back. One of my, the subjects I discuss in the book, I was involved in one stage with a project run by an NGO in the DPRK to install proper working outside lavatories in various villages, which were much more hygienic than the ones that we see in this photograph. And in one of those little vignettes of the way the DPRK works, we went to a village to talk about how the project was going, to discover that the village had solemnly formed the official lavatory committee, and that we were solemnly introduced to the chair lady of this august body, who told us in great detail how all the plumbing was being rigged up and how they were going to move forward. It was quite a moment. A queue, a line for the bus in Pyongyang. As I make clear in the book, transport in Pyongyang is rickety. The buses are very elderly, very run down. The engineers try very hard to maintain them using whatever materials they can find, but they keep breaking down, and trips across Pyongyang are hazardous, not because you're in physical danger, but because you're likely to get stuck in a crowded bus, which just breaks down on you. I never got to see under the bonnet, under the hood of any buses, but a colleague of mine did manage to look inside the engine of one of the old Volvos that was supplied by Sweden many years ago and are still running around Pyongyang, and discovered that parts of the engine were literally held together by chewing gum. And I suspect that if you got inside the bus engines, you might find the same. Notice how orderly the queue is. There's nobody there in charge of that queue. They will just queue up and wait patiently, just out of a sense of good social order. One of the points I really wanted to make in love, Freudian slip. One of the points I really wanted to make in the book was that the DPRK is a country like other countries in many ways, full of real people leading real lives, who don't wander around worrying about the latest nuclear crisis or about sanctions or anything like that, who are much more concerned with their personal relationships, with how their kids are doing at school, with their love lives, and with 1,001 concerns that make up lives everywhere else in the world. And this photograph, I hope, just captures an intimate moment, a couple whispering sweet nothings to each other. One thing that you have to have lived in the DPRK a bit to notice is that they are remarkably well dressed, wearing smart, probably imported anoraks, I suspect dressed up specially to impress the other for the date. Another point I try to make is the dedication that I found in so many places in the DPRK to doing almost impossible jobs. Doctors who will try to treat patients with almost none or sometimes indeed no medicines, able only to bandage wounds and to give moral support where they can. These are two ladies who ran an orphanage in a village. The same orphanage, in fact, as the picture was taken that was the first slide of this show, the young lady looking out from the superimposed DPRK flag. It became clear, talking to them, that they had almost no supplies, almost nothing that they could give these children. They spent a lot of their time scrounging around trying to get something, but they loved those kids and would do anything at all to make their lives a bit less unhappy than they were. Look at those faces. I particularly like this lady. I think she's got a lovely, sort of wrinkly, smiley face. And she was trying to look serious for the photograph. North Koreans have an aversion to smiling for the camera. But the moment the camera was taken away, she went back to her normal, broad grin, typical of the cheerfulness of so many North Koreans living such difficult lives. Korean chess. This was taken in Hamhung, up in the northeast of the DPRK. Leisure pursuits in the DPRK are simple. For many North Koreans, the principal leisure pursuit is sitting around talking to your friends or to your family. They love chatting. Well, South Koreans do too, for that matter, but in North Korea, there's great emphasis on it, largely for lack of anything else to do. These conversations are lubricated by tea or by soju, the firewater, which is for sale at ridiculously low prices, especially in the underpasses on the Pyongyang subway. A big bottle, enough to induce a complete alcoholic paralysis, costs about 500 won at a time when there were 4,500 won to a euro. So what's that? 20 euro cents, about 30 US cents, I guess. I mean, there's money for a North Korean. If you're only earning €1 or €2 a month, you know, that's a bit of a splash out. But if you're on a hard currency salary, getting yourself completely paralytic becomes quite affordable. Now, the other great lubricant socially is games of various kinds. Here, they are playing Korean chess. Now, chess in most Western cultures is just played by two people and is quite an intellectual pursuit. In North Korea, it's social. If you sit down to play chess in a public space, instantly you are surrounded by people giving advice, solicited and unsolicited, as you can see what's going on here. And you can't quite see it, but the man there at the back, the elderly one, he was actually reaching forward to move the pieces to show where they ought to go. In fact, there are so many people giving advice there, you can hardly see the players at all. But you know, they were clearly thoroughly enjoying themselves, far too immersed in their game to worry about a foreigner wandering around with a camera. Very few people think of taking their annual beach holiday in North Korea. But it does actually have stunningly beautiful beaches. That was taken in Wonsan, off on the east coast. And as you can see, it's completely deserted. That was taken in early summer. When I compare it with how crowded South Korean beaches are, I think it's really something of luxury. And can't quite make it out, but this building there is actually a club where for a couple of euros you're given changing rooms and showers and somewhere to drink coffee and everything as you go and splash around in the sea. The water there is actually quite warm. It's a great place to mess around. For North Koreans, holidays at the beach are much sought after. They love the simple physical fun of splashing around in water. And when I first arrived in North Korea, the most sophisticated aid to this that I came across was an inflated inner tube from a truck. By the time I left, North Korean beaches tended to have been invaded by large green polka dot sharks, pink elephants, and all the other inflatable accessories that are deemed necessary to the modern world. It won't be long before they discover surfing. On high days and holy days, it is traditional that you have your photograph taken, and in particular that you have your photographs taken of your children mounted on things like this rather noble-looking horse here, for which the photographers will charge you a couple of $100. A camera is well beyond the means of all but the richest North Korean families, so having a photograph is really quite something. And I would have been indelicate to try to photograph a family being photographed, if you see what I mean. But they used to take ages arranging themselves in front of the props and getting everybody just right, so they'd really get their money's worth. There's two examples of this in the book. This is one which is actually printed in black and white. Another one, which is in colour in the book, one of my favourites, involves also a little plastic Father Christmas. Now, quite how he got into a North Korean photographer's prop set, I don't know, but there he is. North Koreans are taught to sing from a very early age. They are taught to sing mostly the nationalist anthems, paeans to the demigods who rule them, but they are taught to sing, and they're taught to sing in public. And this is a village choir. You can see just at the back there's an accordionist who came to sing for us visiting foreigners when we visited their collective farm. We were supposedly helping with rice transplanting. I'm not sure how much help we actually gave, but anyway, they were far too polite to criticize our rather wobbly efforts. And North Koreans find it very strange that other people are embarrassed about singing. There's an annual event in the foreign community in Pyongyang where we are invited by the North Korean Minister of Foreign Affairs to a concert where all the North Koreans will happily sing away. The director for Europe in the North Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs does a particularly splendid rendition of O Sole Mio in original Italian, which he speaks quite well. And we always sort of fumble along and try to get something right. That's good. Yeah, I'm okay, good for time. Okay, as an anecdote, one of those magical moments that I experienced in North Korea, I had arranged to meet a friend at a certain place at a certain time, and she arrived 20 minutes late. And I said, "Where have you been? I was worried about you. I thought you might have been picked up." And she said, "No, I'm sorry I'm late. I was at a meeting that overran. We were singing songs for Kim Il-sung." So teasing her, I said, "Well, if you were singing songs for Kim Il-sung, I think the least you can do is to sing me one of them. After all, you have kept me waiting." Expecting her just to giggle and sit down. None of that. She said, "Yes, of course." And she stood up and she put herself in the official pose that all North Koreans are taught to adopt when singing a song, with a special smile, and she sang me her little song to a god king, gave a little bow and sat down as if nothing had happened. It was a magical moment. I talked just now about the dedication with which North Koreans try to do their jobs in impossible circumstances. This lady is a pharmacist in a rural clinic. She asked for me to take the photograph with her cupboard of medicines closed because it wasn't quite empty, but there was so little there that she was embarrassed. And she used to say that a lot of the time the patients would come to her and she'd say, "I'm sorry, I haven't got any medicine for you, but tell me about your problem anyway." And she'd just give a kind of, agony aunt chat for them, try to give them psychological support at any rate. I think she had a lovely face too. There you are. One of Kim Il-sung's objectives was to provide tractors for all collective farms. And people who knew North Korea many years before I arrived tell me that at the heyday of North Korea, this was broadly achieved. There were tractors of one kind or another, in one state or another of repair, in most collective farms. By the time I came to North Korea in 2006, the economic crisis had wrought havoc with the system, and they had gone back to planting and transplanting rice by hand. Here, you can see a team of people, I think they're transplanting rather than planting there. You can see what back-breaking labor it is. 2, 3 of them are bent double. You are constantly bending double, standing up, bending double, standing up. Another point is, notice that their legs are bare. Hers, and where's it gone? Hers also. One of the things that foreigners are always asked for when we visit collective farms is rubber boots. Because if you transplant in the water like that with just your bare skin by the water, you suffer all kinds of waterborne parasites, and it really can be quite uncomfortable. A really grindingly hard existence. Transport, too, has taken a few steps back since Kim Il-sung hoped to mechanize it. An ox cart, of the kind that has pulled carts around the Korean peninsula for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they're back in strength. You see them everywhere. You see many more oxen pulling carts, indeed oxen pulling plows, than you ever see tractors. Also, notice if I can get him, the man behind here is riding a bicycle, common in the Korean countryside and a prized possession. Many of the bicycles are actually second-hand Japanese bicycles brought into North Korea when relations with Japan were less frozen than they are now, and supplied by the North Korean community in Japan. There is a joint venture producing bicycles somewhere near Pyongyang, but while I was there, I never saw any North Koreans riding these. They always used to ride the imported ones. Kathy Zellweger, who was here a few weeks ago, said, however, that they have now come into use. The constant imagined threat of war. Those are anti-tank defences. You see them in clusters along almost all the main access roads going down towards the DMZ. And they're simple devices. As you can see, let's try that again. It's this one, right, isn't it? They are simple concrete pillars, and you can't quite see on the photo, but there's a kind of recessed area, sort of there or there, where should the imperialists or the South Korean puppets who fawningly follow their lead invade the People's Paradise, you would simply put an explosive charge into the recess and blow it, so that the great concrete block falls across the road and blocks the tanks. Just a reminder of the constant threat as perceived of war. Hunger again. This was taken in central Pyongyang. The Taedong River has frozen, as it does every winter, and these are people who cut little holes in the ice and are fishing. Modern fishing tackle is almost unknown in North Korea. They were using simple rods, bits of string, and probably bent pins or bent nails and a worm or something on the end. And they would sit there patiently for hours trying to catch a fish or two. A fish to eat in North Korea really is either something of a delicacy or something that will bring in quite a lot of money if you can get it to a market and sell it. And one of the hazards of life in North Korea is putting your little stool just a bit too far out where the ice is just that little bit too thin and hearing that awful crack under you. Another world. This photograph was taken right up on the border with China. I really wanted to take a photograph inside the city of Sinju, which borders Dandong in China, where Sinuiju is laid out in a grid, and you can look down the streets of Sinuiju with the rather battered, dilapidated North Korean houses. And then almost, it seems, at the end of the street, you can see the skyscrapers of Dandong, modern, glistening, resplendent in all the electric light you could ever dream of. Doth the world at the end of the street. But when I went to Sinuiju, the North Koreans accompanying me made very clear that I was not going to be allowed to do this. So I satisfied myself with this photograph, which was taken from a collective farm just outside the city. You can see in the foreground there, I've done it again, there you can see the bleakness of North Korea, nothing very much, and these skyscrapers are all in China. And you have to ask yourself, what do people think who live in these areas? You look across a river and you see this different universe on the other side. It must be really quite hard to digest. Even more starkly, the bridge at Dandong. This is the main railway and road link, actually that's the road bridge, I beg your pardon, between Dandong in China and Sinuiju in North Korea. And it's fascinating because of, not because of the bright bits, because of the black bits. What has happened is that the actual international border is right down the middle of the river. And the Chinese have illuminated the bridge on their half. So up to the halfway through across the river, it is brightly lit. And you can just make out the pylons of the North Korean half, completely dark, nothing there at all. And this, the darkness, is the North Korean coast of the river, not a light on anywhere. Again, a striking example, I think, of the contrast between the newly prosperous China and the poverty of North Korea. For all that, the regime's ideological work continues. These, as you can see, are men painting slogans. And even during times of great housing shortages in Pyongyang, and there are many times of housing shortage, the regime was still able to find concrete and labor to put up big blocks with slogans on them. I always felt it was a very sad reflection on the regime's priorities. Notice that these people are taking typically great care over the slogans, and all slogans, you can see there, are all done by hand. There's not a lot of mechanization. The enemy. This is a popgun range. It is right behind Tongil Market in Pyongyang, which is visited by many foreigners. And for 100 won, you can fire corks at the American imperialists. There you are, who, as you can see, look suspiciously like wolves with big lolling tongues. I always think it's so sad that North Korean kids are inculcated with this at such an early age. And you can see that in this popgun range, the North Korean Air Force has somehow managed to find some fuel that day to actually take off, and is about to zoom in on the imperialists and no doubt wipe them all out. There we are. I said that part 2 of the book was about foreigner life in Pyongyang. This is a picture of foreigners signing the visitors book after visiting the flower show in central Pyongyang. The flower shows are one of the DPRK's stranger political rituals. Both Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il have flowers named after them, and they have separate shows, one each year, where foreigners are invited to go around and look at the various displays. And at the end, you are always invited to say what you think about the show, which is what these two are doing. You have to take great care about what you write, because the regime has an endearing habit of using anything you write in broadcast later. So anything that says suitably ingratiating things about the regime is likely to be on North Korean radio that evening, to the embarrassment of the foreign envoy concerned. I don't know about the United States, but in the United Kingdom, flower arrangement is fiercely competitive. If you are invited to arrange the flowers for your local church, the onus is on you to produce a better and more beautiful flower arrangement than the lady who did it last week. And people will gossip hard about whose flower arrangements were the best. I was intrigued and rather pleased to find that the same happens in North Korea, that the flower shows have been going for many years. And I think for many North Koreans, the ideological component has sort of faded into the background. And they've become much more a way of showcasing your own unit. And huge efforts go into these arrangements. There's a photograph of the flower show in the book, and you'll be able to see how ornate some of the displays are. When I was there in 2008, somebody had found a source of dried ice, of solid carbon dioxide. And of course, if you pour boiling water on dry ice, it produces this sort of rather nice smoky effect that you sometimes see in clubs around New York. Not that I'm suggesting that distinguished people like you go clubbing in New York, but I mean, should you ever do so, you'll probably see this. And this became the must-have accessory for all flower displays that year, as everybody found more and more ingenious ways of creating sort of hazy effects around their flower shows. And I remember being taken by a colleague who worked at one of the North Korean ministries to see the display that his ministry put up, which was absolutely splendid. Lots and lots of dry, smoke everywhere, huge flowers, a painstakingly constructed model of Kim Il-sung's birthplace to show proper piety. A wonderful work of art. And I told him so. It's really quite an achievement. Yes, he said. And then he took me around the corner to see a similar display put up by another unit, which was nothing like as ornate. It didn't have any of the dry ice. And he sort of stood back and said, I think they tried quite hard. Sort of oozing schadenfreude. Democracy in the DPRK. This is a concert at an election. And as you see, the weather wasn't too great that day. Everybody has their brollies up. But nevertheless, everybody was having a good time. Apart from these young ladies singing, there were various bits of food being passed around and drinks and everything. It was all really quite a festive occasion. Of course, elections in the DPRK don't suffer from any of the nagging uncertainties that affect elections in the United States, like who is going to win. You are simply given a list of names, the same number of names as there are places seats to be elected, and you can either vote for or against those people. There's not a lot of voting secrecy, and voting against them really is not a good idea. So that support rates of well above 99% are quite common. I remember I was asked to observe one of these occasions and found myself talking to a very pleasant candidate. He was a middle-ranking official in the Pyongyang municipal government. And knowing about the voting procedure, I sort of po-faced asked him what he thought his chances were of being elected. And he saw the joke immediately, grinned broadly, and said with proper deference, of course, he would deeply respect the wish of the people, but he thought he probably would be elected. I thought, fair enough, I thought. Simple acts of piety. In its own strange way, this is a deeply religious society, where piety, where belief in the quasi-divine powers of the Kims, of the demigods who rule the country, is still deep-seated. Maybe it is ebbing, and in many ways, the DPRK is like Europe at the start of the Enlightenment, where new facts come to light and religious faith is severely questioned, leading a lot of people into various crises of faith. But faith is still widespread. This man is simply sweeping the steps of the great bronze-colored statue of Kim Il-sung in central Pyongyang. No one is making him do this. There's nobody supervising, but just as an act of piety, he has gone to take a brush out of a little cupboard, which is photographed again in the book, and he's sweeping it to clean the steps for his demigod. At the other end of the scale, there's the simple need to make a living. As we all know, the DPRK economy is not particularly healthy. These people are bicycle repairmen, right by the Mayday Stadium. And they are, well, repairing bicycles, as you can see, which is much cheaper in North Korea than in New York, as I've discovered. They are actually rather good at what they do. Some of the refinements of Western bicycles confuse them, but they will always have a good go at fixing whatever goes wrong. And I remember taking a bicycle to one of them to have a puncture repaired once, and he duly did it with considerable skill and great speed. Then whacked his finger at me and told me I need to take better care of my inner tubes, which is a lesson I've carried with me ever since. Interaction between the two Koreas. This is a photograph of the Kaesong Industrial Zone inside one of the factories. It looks amazingly just like a South Korean factory. You can see that it's clean, it's well lit. I couldn't capture on the photograph the fact that a kind of gentle folksy music was being played. The manager told me that the workers were allowed to choose their own music. And it was interesting that he was probably telling the truth, that they chose something quite gentle and easy to listen to rather than the braying marches of which the regime is so fond. One of the big pluses of working in the Kaesong Industrial Zone is access to the canteen at lunchtime, which is either free or heavily subsidized depending on where you work, which offers up food far, far better than most North Koreans get access to. That didn't work, let's try that again. A traffic girl, now sadly replaced by soulless traffic lights as of 2009, 2010, I think it was. But at the time I was there, one of the icons of Pyongyang. Utterly charming, and with a complex set of movements that you had to learn to interpret to work out whether you were allowed to proceed or not. They all have pigtails, and it took me 2 years to realize that the pigtails are fake. They're actually attached to the back of their caps. Some of you may have heard of the famous Emperor Casino in the Rason Zone, the one that was closed down after a Chinese local official lost most of his city's budget gambling there, and the Chinese refused to allow further gamblers across the border. But I realized that nobody had actually published a photograph of this, so I thought I would. That's what it looks like, a completely square building. When I went to stay there, it was ghostly. There were these big roulette holes with cloths all over the roulette tables, and nobody there, no customers. And I was accompanied by 2 members of my local North Korean staff, who, the Chinese owners told me, were the very first Koreans ever to stay there. And I remember they had breakfast together the next morning, and they had seemed to have spent the night playing with all the buttons and the taps and everything inside the hotel rooms, were interrogating me as to whether this was the way the West really was. They were intrigued by all the machinery. The North Koreans tried to insist that Kim Il-sung virtually single-handed freed the Korean peninsula from the Japanese. This is not quite what history teaches us. In fact, a number of other people had a hand in the process. And the Russians every year invite everybody to a wreath laying at the Russian cemetery to remind everybody that they too were involved in the process. And you can see at the back there all the graves. Most of them, in fact, of people who died after the Japanese surrender, but the point nevertheless is made. The Random Access Club in Pyongyang, available only to foreign residents of Pyongyang, therefore probably the most exclusive club in the world. Just before I came, you had to queue to get a drink there on Friday nights. But sadly, I arrived just as the non-government organizations, the NGOs, were being thrown out of Pyongyang, out of the DPRK. And it was empty even on Friday nights. You can see the bare walls here, which used to be festooned with various souvenirs put up by regulars who took them down, took them home when they left. The barman there is actually Vietnamese. He was a Vietnamese student at Kim Il-sung University. and used to confuse Western visitors by talking to the other bar staff in Korean, which of course all the students there used as a common language. Finally, the USS Pueblo. I included it just to show that it is definitely still there. You can visit it for, I think it's 10 euros, and be shown round by a rather sweet North Korean NCO, who will tell you all about the confessions of the crew who were arrested on the Pueblo, as you probably know the story. She tends to get a bit coy when you ask about the methods that were used to induce these people to confess. But they're a standing reminder of a particularly nasty incident. I'm so sorry, Stephen. I think I've gone on for rather longer than you might have intended. I'd be very happy to answer questions. Do we still have time for a question? Okay. I ought to say that, as I think a lot of you know, as Stephen announced, I coordinate the panel of experts of the United Nations, which has attracted a certain amount of media attention in recent weeks over various issues. I'm very happy to answer questions on the book, or indeed on North Korea generally. I'd prefer not to answer questions on my current job. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador. A round of applause, please, for the Ambassador. If you have comments or questions, please queue right here. Please say your name and your affiliation, as we are live web streaming and recording this program. Thank you.
I'm an Italian correspondent. My name is Mauro Lucentini. How many other major countries besides China, of course, are represented besides Britain too, or officially in North Korea?
22.
22. Important countries, for instance, France is represented?
No, France has no diplomatic relations with the DPRK. Within the European Union, France and Estonia have no diplomatic relations. Everybody else does. There are 7 EU embassies in Pyongyang. Important countries, you're getting me onto difficult political ground here, but I mean, yeah, I mean, just as an example, the Chinese and Russians are there in force, as you'd expect. Of the African countries, only Nigeria is represented. The Cubans are there, Vietnamese, Laotians. I can't now go through the entire list, but there's quite a scatter.
Oh, yes, Great Britain is represented. You were an ambassador there. So.
Therefore, it's represented. Yes, yes, quite so.
Hello, my name is Kirsten Deckert. I'm a teacher, and
Hi.
I, in my past, have met students who've been in North Korea, and I, mostly from the East Bloc countries, Vietnam, similar to your bartender. Right. And I was wondering, is that still a destination, or when you were there, were you familiar with how many foreign students were there, or not really?
I don't know how many were there in total. Yes, I knew a lot of these students because the great majority of students, at least in Kim Il-sung University, are Chinese. And they would, from time to time, descend on the Random Access Club, on the RAC, on Friday nights, and beat us all at ping pong, which they did with great efficiency. There was also, well, there's the Vietnamese, I think I mentioned just now. There were a couple of Kazakh ladies, and I think there might have been 1 or 2 Russians at various stages, though I never actually met them. It's a select band. The full course for learning Korean in Kim Il-sung University takes 4 years, and it takes some dedication to spend 4 years in Pyongyang just learning Korean.
Thank you.
My name's Gary Mizell. I like to identify myself or characterize myself as a member here of the Korea Society. And I'm just curious to know, is there an art museum in North Korea or any kind of cultural institution there?
Sure. There's an art gallery, but also there is, how shall I say, there's the Myeongdong Art Studio, where you can go and buy paintings by North Korean artists, some of which are quite creditable. You might not always share their taste in subject matters, but technically they're good. Very North Korean. They are arranged by floor according to the rank of the artist. You can be, I'm trying to remember the rank, you can be a hero artist, a national artist, and there are 2 others. And of course, the most senior artists got to sell their paintings from the ground floor, which is where people would first come. If you wanted to see more junior works, you had to go up the stairs. So,
Can we buy one? I mean, can an American buy one of these paintings?
comrade, if you got hard currency in North Korea, you can buy pretty much what you like.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hi, Ambassador. My name is David Hong, and I'm a member of the Korean Society. And while I'm up here, I'm going to be greedy and ask you two questions.
Sure.
One is the crime rate high there because of the high poverty rate? And my second question is, how come there are no traffic boys?
Yeah, is the crime rate high? No, it's not very high. Crime does exist, including violent robbery. A colleague of mine once witnessed a mugging, but only once. Crime against foreigners is very rare. The things that would happen to you if you're caught trying to steal from a foreigner, I wouldn't want to spoil your appetites by describing. But you notice one of the changes that you see in Pyongyang from before the famine is that people have started to put bars over their windows in lower story apartments, which they never used to do. Putting steel bars up is quite a resource commitment in North Korea, so that, they must be really quite worried about it. Crime does exist. Do you see traffic boys? Yes, outside Pyongyang. Pyongyang gets all the girls, but so to speak. But outside Pyongyang, the traffic police are burly, unsmiling, middle-aged men. Nothing like as smiley as the traffic girls of Pyongyang. For why that should be, I don't know, but that's what it is.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Richard Rades. I'm just a member of the Korea Society. If you accept that a military is to some extent the reflection of the economy underlying a country, did you get any sense of the North Korean military and how effective it was given the poverty of the country and the backwardness of the economy?
Oh, I had all kinds of dealing with the North Korean military, but only at kind of ground level. You see, if you're a foreigner in Pyongyang, you are allowed to travel within 35 kilometers of central Pyongyang. That's the rule book says. In fact, what that means is that you are allowed up to the first ring of military checkpoints around the capital, so that you're always bumping into the young squaddies, the young soldiers who ran the checkpoints. And I found them, for the most part, to be simply, Korean lads doing their time, very, very bored. I mean, just standing at a checkpoint or waving, bicycles down isn't a lot of fun. And effective as a fighting force. I was once stopped at a checkpoint because I had somehow cycled outside the ring and I was cycling back into Pyongyang the wrong way. And the squaddies sort of saw me and with some nervousness sort of flagged me down and told me to stop. And they sort of parked my bicycle and asked me and gave me to their commanding officer, who, completely intrigued at having a real foreigner to deal with that day, sort of sat me down and chatted to me and offered me pressed cigarettes. And all the time we were talking, his men would come to and fro, taking their weapons out of and putting them into the weapons safe at the end. And I could see that none of them wore socks. Evidently, that particular unit, although it was actually at the capital, they had boots but no socks. So I think they'd have had pretty shaped feet if they've ever gone into action. And they were scrawny. These were hungry soldiers. But they were always very friendly. I remember also once I cycled up to a checkpoint and the young soldier manning it sort of saw this foreigner coming, blinked in disbelief. Foreigner on a bicycle, and he sort of waved me down and said, "I'm so sorry. I really can't let you go through." And then he gulped and overwhelmed at the enormity of having stopped a foreigner and trying to show he wasn't hostile. He said, "But do come and have a cup of tea." So he got out a little tin mug and sort of brewed up a cup of tea, which I sort of sat and solemnly and drank with him. That was very typical. Thanks.
Hi, I'm a member of Korea Society and a journalist. So what is your prescriptive for how to have better relations with North Korea?
Lady, if I could answer questions like that. One of the points I hope that I made in the book is that all kinds of, not all kinds of things, but two broad approaches have been tried. Now, we try to engage North Korea to change it, by the Sunshine Policy, the kindness, vast amounts of aid at huge expense, and we try to pressure, nudge, whatever. And both approaches have failed. Where do we go from here? I don't know, but as I say in the book, I think we have to accept that where we got to now is not that great a place, and we need to try something new. Sorry, that wasn't much of an answer, but it's probably best I can do.
No, it's okay. And also, you also said
Aha,
that.
a cheat second question.
Yes.
Yeah, I
well,
thought
because,
so.
You also said that where North Korea is now is probably failed colonization.
Yes.
So given that, what is your sort of ideas of where that could go given their past?
One of the sad lessons that we've learned of other examples of failed decolonization is that once you have made the mistakes, they are extremely difficult to reverse. Indeed, I won't turn this into a lecture on post-colonial history, but in the other examples, some of which I mentioned in the book, the problems, although they're different from North Korea, are still there. We don't know how to fix these questions.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I am Jose Alman, and I teach political science at Fordham University. And I have two questions. One is, I wonder if you could comment on how difficult this post was for you compared to others, given that it's such a unique country. And secondly, I wonder if you know anything about the fate of defectors to DPRK. There used to be at 1.4, I believe, U.S. GIs who had defected to North Korea. I think there's only maybe one or two that are left there now.
Sure.
And I saw on Netflix once a documentary about one of them who was very much tied to the country and lives there and married, a North Korean woman. So I wonder if you know anything about those defectors, that are still there. Thank you.
Okay, let me answer the second question first. No, I don't. Both the defectors and also a difficult issue, the Japanese who were abducted are kept well out of the way of other foreigners. I believe that they are somewhere in Pyongyang, but the regime is careful to ensure that none of us ever meet these people. A colleague of mine once told me that he thought he'd actually sort of come across one of the US defectors, but that was a rare sighting. In general, there's an almost complete separation. How did I deal with living in Pyongyang? At the risk of completely blowing my credibility, I have to admit that I actually quite like living in Pyongyang. It was, there we go, that's it, blown. It's tough in many ways. You're living in a society where the regime holds you at arm's length and where forming any kind of relationship with local people is something of an uphill struggle. But on the other hand, firstly, everything is ridiculously cheap. I don't smoke, but you can buy tobacco in Pyongyang markets for just a few hundred won for a great big 500-gram bag, and it's proper killer North Korean tobacco, not the wimpy stuff you get in the West. So if you want to smoke, North Korea is the country for you. You can pig out any way you like. A typical largish meal while I was there in an ordinary North Korean restaurant would cost 1,000 or 2,000 won, so about €0.50. And for that, you walk out bow-legged. The food may not be that great. It's all cooked with fresh ingredients because that's the only ingredients they've got. No, there's no sort of chillage or freezing they can apply. There's almost no pollution. From my residence in Pyongyang, I could look out the window and see the stars, beautiful clear night skies all the time. Try doing that in New York City. There were birds singing in the trees outside my window. Not coughing like in New York, but actually singing. And had this great community of foreigners, all of whom were just slightly offbeat around you. People were very friendly. You didn't spend evenings alone. There are worse places to be, believe me. I've been there.
Good evening. I'm Jeffrey Laurenti with the Century Foundation. And like others, I want two bites out of the apple, one social, the other political.
Sure.
One of your first slides was of a couple to whom you imputed romantic intentions. To what extent does, quote, sex exist as a matter of public discussion in North Korea? How puritanical or prurient is the public acknowledgement of its existence. How suppressed, repressed is it? And to what extent do people feel that there is a strict marital or whatever code? That's a subject of kind of prurient curiosity. Then the political question, to what extent were you and other Western diplomats able to get a feel for how the Korean Workers' Party recruits members, recruits leadership ranks at the local level on up? To what extent are you able to get a sense of how political power may operate, even in the smallest degree, upward as well as downward? What are the major power centers within the political regime?
Okay, let me answer the second question first. Down to quite a low level, increasingly, political power is held by retired members of the military. Although they're no longer serving officers, it's common to see people retired from the Korean People's Army and sent off to be to take positions in local governments. But also, local party committees tended to sort of have a majority say in selecting who they were going to put in what position. I mean, this is not democracy as you and I would understand it, but they did seem able, to a considerable extent, to make their own decisions independent of more central guidance. That was down to sort of kind of village level. I think as you got into cities and into counties, Pyongyang's influence was more directly felt. It's difficult to be more precise than that, because the regime, of course, is not entirely transparent about its selection processes, and simply names appear, and it's often not clear why they appeared. Sex, yes. When you talked to North Koreans, unmarried North Koreans, both men and women, about anything like premarital sex, you had a range of reactions. I mean, I found young people who looked puzzled at this concept. I mean, you got married and then you had sex, didn't you? I mean, that was just the way the nature was. Down to others who admitted that they knew of cases where there had been extramarital relationships, but weren't going to say anything more about it. Prostitution is rampant. I knew a Korean, a man obviously, who traveled round the country quite a lot and who would quote me the going rates for prostitutes in different cities. They tended to hover around the $10 mark, which is an indication of poverty, I think, is also telling. Another had a system of girlfriends, one in each city. Like Sellers used to have a wife in every port. He had it all worked out. He just used to go and stay with whichever it was in whichever city. Korean women I knew used to fret that their husbands might be being unfaithful. I mean, whether this was just nervousness or whether they had grounds for this, I never quite got to the bottom, but clearly, it was an issue in Korean society like it is in many others. Korean men, I'm not so sure. I remember once I lent a friend, a man, a set of Desperate Housewives, the DVDs. And he took these away and watched them. And when he gave them back, he took me aside and said, "Comrade Ambassador, I'm really worried. I think my wife might be one of them." And I thought, I just couldn't think of a sensible answer at the time. I still can't now. Okay. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Christy Gavitt with the American Red Cross in Washington. I've got 3 questions. First, were you able to forge some friendships with some of your colleagues where you could see them, they'd have you over there, you'd have them over to your house, etc.? Secondly, were there any nutrition surveys that were done during your time in North Korea? And how were they, if so, how were they handled? Was it controversial? Were the North Koreans essentially saying what the conditions would be in order to do them? And thirdly, what is the average time for Western ambassadors in North Korea? Is that more imposed by your government, or is it the North Koreans that essentially say it's 2 years, that's it?
Okay, I'll ask the last question first. No, the time that a Western ambassador or a Western diplomat stays in North Korea, or for that matter any other diplomat, is determined by the sending country. The British ambassadors tend to hover around 2.5 years. I did 2.5 years within almost a few weeks. I think my predecessor did 3, my successor did 2, so it sort of bears around that. Basically, Western governments will tend to pull people out before you go completely stir crazy. For North Korea, I mean, as I said, I quite like Pyongyang, but it does strange things to people. Relationships suffer. A lot of embassies had real problems of alcoholism. Bringing up children was a particular challenge. And people tended to, government rather tended to be a bit cautious about having people there for too long. The Russians and the Chinese tended to have longer rotations, partly because they had shorter ways to go before they could get home. I mean, if you're Chinese, you can just about get back to Beijing to spend the weekend there if you wish. The airfares tend to mount up, okay, but you can do it. So yeah, around 2.5 years. Sorry, I've answered the third question. I've got the other 2 were. Give us some.
About nutrition surveys and about forging friendships.
Forging friendship with God. You develop a kind of relationship with North Korean officials, and you can invite them to your home. Whether or not they're allowed to come depends not on them. I mean, they're not free agents in this, but on the protocol department. How long they stay is also determined. They will come in looking at their watches, and they will leave at a prescribed time thereafter to send a political signal. If you go over 2 hours, if you get 2.5 hours, you know that they like you that week. Under 2 hours, they're cross with you. It's simple as that. Nutrition surveys, yes. One of North Korea's major export products is nutrition surveys. And there were lots done when I was there. They continue to suffer from all kinds of methodological problems. The people conducting the surveys do not get the breadth of access they need to get statistically robust results. That was the case when I was there. It's still the case now. And they continue to show, with that caveat, significant food insecurity across the country.
Well, with that question, we'll close. And just to note, we are having a program on feeding North Korea nutritional assistance with Claudia Von Roll on July 18th. So I'll plug in that one. And I'm going to turn it over to our Senior Vice President, Dr. Nerper. Thank you so much, Ambassador.